Great. Well, it's good evening, everyone, and I want to welcome you to UUMC's Town Hall, which is live at 7 p.m. on June 6th. Do want to let you know that we are recording this as well. So I'd always like people to know that, so that any comments that you make, you should be aware that they're being recorded for posterity, and this might be shared with other church members. My name is Don Balcom, and I am the chair of our church council at UUMC. And tonight our focus is really to share with you our plans for the coming months regarding how we want to sort of replant and re-engage and how we're hopefully going to interact with each other over these coming months. And let me tell you how we plan to do that. In a moment, I'll turn this over to Pastor Justin Coleman, who will give you some sort of overview perspectives from a church standpoint. And then Justin will turn this over to Dr. Wes Wallace, who very kindly throughout the pandemic has given us a medical and a public health perspective on these issues. So Wes is going to update us a little bit on sort of where we are public health wise and how to think about that in the decisions that we're making. And then we will turn it over to Pastor Creighton Alexander, who's going to give us the more detailed perspective on what these plans actually look like and give you some real detail on that whole kind of a process. And this was a plan that has been devised by the clergy and staff in collaboration with church council, and want to make sure that you know that therefore this is really a joint collaborative process, and church council has unanimously endorsed this plan. In terms of the big picture major points, we're quite aware that fine points might continue to evolve as we learn more and as things change over the coming time. And we want to also acknowledge quite clearly there is no, quote, right or wrong way to move through this transition phase. All of us are in unique situations. We confront different stressors and risks, and we have different desires and different risks that we're willing to take. So we know some people would probably like to see us move faster. Other people would probably like to see us move a little bit more slowly. And we hope, though, that the plans that we've developed seem reasonable to you, although we're quite aware they can't meet the unique needs and preferences of every member of our congregation. And we also definitely want to use this time to receive your input, to answer any questions that you have, provide any clarifications, and also just to get your point of view on various kinds of issues. And here's how we'll try to do that. Hopefully you see on your screen that there's a chat button down at the very bottom of the screen. So if you have comments, questions, clarifications that you'd like, just type that into the chat box at the very bottom. I'll monitor those. And we won't respond to those as we go because we want to make sure we have time for all of those presenters to get through this in a timely fashion. We're going to try to finish everything up in an hour at least. But at the very end, we will leave good sufficient time to address any questions that you put into the chat box. And so I'll monitor those. Feel free to add those as we go. When you add something to the chat, sometimes it pops up and everybody sees it. And if you're having those throughout a presentation, it can be distracting. So maybe after each speaker finishes, if you've got a question or comment, type it in. But we'll wait until the very end in order to address those kind of comments. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you have any trouble with the chat, we'll have Creighton unmute everybody at the end and you can just ask your questions out loud if that turns out that is easier for you to do. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our clergy and the staff for this past year. From my perspective, they have provided us with incredible leadership, countless hours of energy and effort, and some really unique creativity in terms of how they have led us through this time. So we've heard multiple positive comments about how this year has gone in spite of the stressors from a church perspective. So again, staff, clergy, thank you very much, and all church members and volunteers for what you've done to really keep our congregation and our ministry vibrant during this time. Our goal, as I said, is to finish us in less than an hour. So I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Pastor Justin at this point.
Thank you, Don, and thank you on behalf of the staff for your kind words. As it always is, it's been an honor to walk with the church during these unusual times. As I came to University United Methodist Church and was talking with leaders, I said, not exactly knowing what it meant, that I felt that these next years would be pivotal for University United Methodist Church, and God would be calling us to think about new things and new ways to reach more people. Had no idea that we'd be dealing with global pandemic and then other matters in the life of the broader church that we've been dealing with. But we're all here. Each of us is here for such a time as this. I want to share just a few words around our thinking leading up to this regathering in person. Some of these you've heard me say here in the past across this pandemic. We have been guided throughout these months by the values of our church and the values of our broad religious community. And in Wesleyan terms, that's been to, as best as possible, do no harm. And the way that we have looked at that is trying to take care of those who are most vulnerable in the life of our church and in the life of our broader community. And so we've tried to pay very close attention to medical advice. I'll turn it over to Wes in a moment, but Dr. Wes Wallace has been invaluable, not only to our church, but also the area churches and the North Carolina Annual Conference as we have thought about these things. And so we've valued caring for those who are most vulnerable. We've also valued the covenant of the faith community. So we've had a number of churches in town, I should say faith communities in town, because it goes beyond local churches, that have been in regular conversation almost every single week since this pandemic began. We've met together to pray, to talk about what was going on in the life of our faith communities, in the life of our broader community, and conditions around COVID and conditions around justice. And so that has been a sweet part of what has been a very challenging time, is the faith community really coming together and creating a covenant that we've not had before in our town, at least with that kind of regular conversation and work together. So been thankful for that. So our values as a faith community and the covenant that we've walked in have guided us. We've tried to be divorced from political machinations throughout this period, both on the local and state and national levels. It really has been about the medical community, scientific community, and our prayers that have guided us throughout. Along the way, we have found ways to be church together, to reach out to members of our community, and to extend the boundaries of our church and into even different geographies. And so that has been a blessing to us. The staff has been wonderful, wonderfully creative, wonderfully caring, and prayerful throughout. We don't claim to have done everything perfectly, but we have sure tried to care for our community as best we can. And folks have given sustained energies really without breaks since the beginning of the pandemic. And so I'm thankful for our staff for that. As we move into this time of regathering, as it's been announced on June 20th, we'll have our first in-person worship service, and we'll be meeting in person every 3 weeks. So that means July the 11th will be our next in-person worship service. And so we'll follow that pattern until after Labor Day, and then we'll meet week to week. Part of the reasoning around this is that, we pivoted into this virtual life, but now as we pivot into in-person life, there is a lot of overlap between the digital and in-person activities. So we want to have time for not only our staff leaders, but also our volunteers to acclimate, because there will be things that look differently than they did when we last remember being together. And Creighton will walk us through some of those at the end of the presentation. But we want to do things well. We want to take in the broad needs of our community, and we want to perfect things along the way. And so this rhythm will help us to do that in a way that cares for our staff and cares for our congregation as we do it. And again, Creighton will share more about that toward the end. Um, uh, Again, this is a time where we'll be doing things a little bit differently. So here's another plug. We need you. We need volunteers to usher, to be communion stewards, to serve with our children's ministry and youth ministry. Because of the rhythms that will be slightly different, we need more folks to support the ministries of the church. It's not a light switch, it's a dimmer switch. And so as we acclimate and grow into this regathered life together, we need volunteers. And so again, I hope that folks won't hear this message and say, well, somebody else will do it. I hope you'll be asking yourself the question, how can I serve? In what way can I serve the church that might be different than I've ever served the church before? And so I hope you will consider serving. As I said earlier, our chief medical consultant has been Dr. Wes Wallace, who's been such a great gift, again, to our congregation, to our local faith community, and to our annual conference. And so I want to turn it over to Wes to talk about some of the things we've been thinking about leading up to this point, and some of the things we'll be thinking about moving forward. Wes?
Thanks, Justin. It's been my great pleasure to work with both leaders in our church and other faith communities in Chapel Hill and around the state as we have moved together through this miserable pandemic. And I just, for those of you that don't know me, I am adjunct professor of emergency medicine at UNC, a medical advisor to the Office of Emergency Medical Services for the state of North Carolina, and a medical officer on a federal disaster medical assistance team. So let me just talk a little bit about the science and the public health issues involved in this. And Creighton, I guess, is the best way to do this, just to ask you to advance the slide, please. So where are we currently in Chapel Hill? What's our risk? Well, if you look at the various indices that have been constructed looking at the more local risk, we are either at a low or medium risk on a 5-point scale. So we're at the next to the lowest index in Chapel Hill. While not great nationally, in North Carolina, we're doing well. We vaccinated 52% of all residents. But the corollary of this is, unfortunately, that almost half the residents of our community are not vaccinated. And if you're not vaccinated, you inherit this low to medium risk of getting COVID-19. Next slide, please. So being cautious in reopening our community, faith community, is appropriate viewed through a public health lens. Sadly, churches around the world have been the sites of really significant super spreading events. The slide that you see on your screen is a church in Mecklenburg County. This single church, in only a few days, generated 121 cases of COVID-19 and 5 deaths. So churches have the potential for being super spreading venues. And one thing to remember that now in this portion of the pandemic, the variants of COVID that we're seeing now are much more contagious than the original virus. They're so contagious. If we look at people who are not vaccinated, what we see is that the spread of the disease among that community of unvaccinated people is essentially as high as it was during the height of the pandemic among everyone. So those of us who are vaccinated are very protected by the vaccines. Those who are not around the country are at significant risk. Next slide, please. So who are these people that we need to work hard to protect within our faith community and the community at large? Well, we know that 3 to 4% of the population of this country cannot mount an immune response even after they get the vaccine. These are people with cancer who, because of their disease or the medications that they're taking of the disease, in response to this disease, can't develop a robust immune response. These are people with inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, who may take immune dampening medications that keep them from developing, once again, this robust response. So they likely cannot successfully fight off this disease. Children under 12 obviously cannot get the vaccine and remain at risk for COVID-19. While it is easy seen from the position of relative wealth and education that most of us have, there are still members of our community who are struggling to overcome vaccine access problems because of the hours that they work, childcare issues. Some of them misunderstand that this is a free vaccine, having been stung by the medical system before. Some of them have transportation issues. Those are people we still are working hard to reach. And then there are simply those who are hesitant or resistant to the vaccine. And altogether, once again, that constitutes almost half the members of our community. Next slide, please. So the question then is, how do we protect one another as we regather? And this will be a serial reveal, Clayton, so I'll ask you just to touch the advanced slide to see the next writing. First of all, everyone in our services will need to wear masks. It's always possible that someone who is not vaccinated will be completely asymptomatic. We know that about 60% of the people who are at the maximum stage of spreading are either pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. So because of that, we want everyone to wear masks. It's possible that those of us who have been vaccinated could have asymptomatic cases and spread the disease. Unlikely, but still possible. Next, please. We need to minimize behaviors that aerosolize the virus. And unfortunately for us, that really means no singing, at least initially, as we begin to regather for our services. Next point, please. We need to optimize the ventilation and the filtration of air within our church. Staff are working hard on doing this, along with members of the congregation who have expertise in this area. And I think we've made great strides in doing this work. Next, please. We need to observe appropriate social distancing and cleaning. Plans are in place for that. We need to remain flexible, following the numbers and the science, and be willing to change in response. Some models that have been revealed in the last month or so suggest that it's possible, if sufficient people don't behave responsibly, we could get another surge in the fall. So we have to be ready to respond to that if that occurs. Next, please. Finally, as Justin suggested, This process needs to be a dimmer switch, not an on-off button. The dimmer switch gives us the advantage of being able to have some time to evaluate the steps that we've taken and to see if we need to fine-tune them or change them as we get more information and as the science changes. And that's it.
Thank you, Wes. With those, with now I'm going to be able to share some details of where we are in our replanning, regathering efforts, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for y'all to write your questions, and Justin and Don will respond. But for this regathering, this replanning, we've got three movements. We're in movement 1 now to June 19th. Movement 2 is June 20th through September 11th, basically the summer months, where we'll be conducting 4 services to test and make sure we know what we're doing as we gather. And then finally, movement 3, September 12th, Sunday, September 12th, after Labor Day, with our fall kickoff. There is on our website, we have a page, a link to a page called Regathering. It's right there on our homepage, and this is where you'll find updated information, videos from Justin as he continues to inform us. Also, on that Regathering page, you'll find the link to actually register for our services. Now, as we're planning, as we're regathering, we're making some commitments, and we're trying to make the best decisions for one another. How do we care for all of us? Like Wes said, we're going to stay adaptable and flexible. If the numbers go up, we lean in more. If they go bad or go south, we're going to adjust to make sure we are responding in the way that we need to. And we're going to move at our own pace to protect our congregation. Governor Cooper has an economy to run, an economy to get going again. We don't. We're going to move at a way that makes sense to us. It may be overly cautious to others, to some, but we'll find a pace that makes this right. As we gather, we're going to assume that we're going to be in a mixed group, being that there's going to be some that are vaccinated and others that aren't. And so we are committing to wear masks inside the church at all times. And then finally, with our volunteers, as we welcome volunteers back into the church, starting here in a week, we're asking that you'd wear a mask and that you'd be fully vaccinated, which is 2 doses plus 2 weeks to be in the church office. Movement 1 that we're in now to the 19th has been focused on outside events with no groups over 25 in the building. There has been we have made exceptions when groups are fully vaccinated, like the chancel choir. We are actually recording today the chancel choir because that whole group is vaccinated, and we feel like the risk is minimum. They are masked while they're doing it, but they're gathering. Our outside gatherings, these have really been creative and pioneering ways for us to gather, from U-Crew, Youth and Children's Choir. Pastor Toby has led the communion in the courtyard that has gathered people, as well as different events, like for Troop 39, a Court of Honor, that was a hybrid meeting, actually a hybrid Zoom meeting with those receiving, the Eagles who were getting their awards in the sanctuary, and then everyone else being at home on Zoom. And I just want to point out that on our regathering page that we're going to be updating our frequently asked questions there that are really kind of drilling into the details. So that if you have questions, I think we're answering most of those, but would always appreciate other questions as well to help us do this right. But it's there on our regathering page on the website. Movement 2 will be over the summer, beginning with our first worship service. And the focus is to experiment with larger groups and in-person worship gatherings. Can we do it in a right, and can we do it in a way that we don't create a super spreader event? As Pastor Justin said, our 4 worship services will be June 20th, July 11th, August 1st, and August 22nd. Again, those dates are on that Regathering web page as well. And this, what we're really excited about here in Movement 2 is welcoming back church volunteers to participate. The office volunteers and communion and communion stewards and others have, it's more than just the task that they do. It's getting to be around each other. So we're excited about that happening. Like Justin said, we need your help and for volunteer recruitment, ushers and greeters, and children's ministry. And on our on that Regathering page, you'll find and click on a link where you can actually volunteer. And so we want to encourage people to help us welcome everybody back into our house. Movement 2 will be what we're calling no touch as much as possible, which means that we won't have bulletins. That offering plates won't be passed in the pews, but there'll be a place inside the service to actually give your offering, whether that's in the back of the sanctuary or up front when we come to take communion. And communion will be bread only in a way that, so that we can make sure that we are creating a safe environment for all while getting to celebrate communion together as a body. Like Wes said, there will not be any corporate singing. We may have a singer or videos of the choir, but no corporate singing. And then what we're asking people to do is register through Realm to actually be to come to the services, and that's really to know what capacity we'll be at, as well as to help communicate with others in case we need to do contact tracing. If you would go on to that, if you go into the Regathering page, there's a blue oval rectangle, a blue rounded rectangle in the middle of that page, and it'll ask you to register. And what this is going to do is going to take you to our Realm page, our Realm site, which is our church database, which helps us serve members, helps where people can register events and get information. And so if you don't have a Realm account yet, I want to encourage you to take the time to do that, because once you sign up through Realm, it will be your registration for other services or other events in the future will be easier. Movement 3, beginning September 12th forward, we will see weekly worship services take place. We'll see Sunday schools begin again, and as Sunday schools begin again, and even though some may choose to be hybrid, we're working on the capacity for people to join those classes wherever they are. And then, what I'm looking forward to in the fall is the beginning of our Sunday night program again, which is children and youth choirs, youth crew, other children events or programming during the night, and then weekly Bible studies and meetings throughout the week. But it's on Movement 3 that we're going to lean back into what is going to be our new normal, as we've tested it over the summer. And and those are the details, some of the details that we are working with. And again, that Regathering page on our website, right at the top of our homepage, a link right at the top of our homepage, is a great place to continue to find information as we pull it together and begin to share with the congregation. Justin, Don, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, and thank you. That sounds great. And maybe let's stop the screen share so we can have a little bit larger blocks here. That's super. So if you've got questions or comments, please type them into the chat, and we will address those according to whoever has a perspective or expertise in a given area.
So I see one already from Brad Allen. Thanks, Brad. As you may recall, the Sunday that we went into lockdown across our area was to be the Sunday that Father Gregory Boyle was to speak at University Church. And I know a number of folks were really excited about that. I have been in contact with his administrative assistant, and we're going to find a time to get him back on the calendar. He is releasing his third book in October, and so he's got quite a book tour to work through. So I'm going to try to get us squeezed in as soon as possible. But thanks for that question, Brad.
That's great. And there's a question from Sandra, and it might be Creighton. You might be the best person to address this. With our touchless service, what are the ushers going to be doing that is different from greeters? Do you have a sense of how these roles will sort of?
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Thank you for that question. So we are, what this is allowing us to do is to put emphasis on our greeter team, which will be, there will be a table gathered in the narthex of the sanctuary, and then a table between the sanctuary and the education building that will help greet and help acclimate and welcome people back into our space. Now, with the touchless service, with a no-touch service, but the greeters will also be helping people do is pull up the bulletin on their phone, whether through a QR code or through a link. I think many of us have ventured out to restaurants again, and when they've not had menus, they've asked you to take a picture of a seems like a fuzzy square, and then once you take that picture, it sends you to a link. And so we're going to create several ways of helping people find that. With most of us having smartphones, I mean, I know there are some Luddites out there who still want their non smartphone flip phone set. But with most people having a smartphone, we're going to help them get to those bulletins, so that once they're inside, what ushers will be helping with, Sandra, I am getting there, is to help seat people, help create social distancing in a way that's comfortable, as well as helping with counts again, and then leading people through communion. Because they're not handing out bulletins, there will be Joe and Lisa, who are head ushers for the 9 and 11, or 11 and 9 respectively, feel like they can do the work with fewer people, and yet still want to encourage people to come and be a part of that team.
I'll take the next question. Sally and Jim ask, why no bulletins, since worshipers can pick them up off windowsills and things of that nature? So there are a couple reasons for this. One is because, yes, certainly congregants could pick them up from different places, but you do have more hands on the stack. There are other reasons as well for this. Well before the pandemic, we'd been talking about ways to create not only efficiencies around the church, but also to take care of our environment. And as you can imagine, we print lots and lots of bulletins, and so as a way to support the work of our environmental stewardship team and to reduce the amount of recycling that we have to do. If you don't print it, you don't have to recycle it. We're encouraging people to either, as Creighton said, click on a link or put in the QR code there to have bulletins. We will have a limited number of bulletins on hand for those who need it because they are a visitor for the first time and didn't exactly know how to or less comfortable accessing it through one of the other means because of issues with sight, multiple reasons that someone might prefer to have one. But we really want to encourage people to continue to use the digital option moving forward beyond the pandemic so that we can reduce the need to recycle.
Justin, even though Sally and Jim did not ask this, I will say as well that you have to realize that the bulletin doesn't just tell you what's happening at the church service. This is a major modality for decades of writing notes to your partner right beside you during the worship service. So this is going to require more creativity on the congregation's part.
Well, so now we really won't know if you're So if you have your smartphone out and you're texting the person next to you, we'll just assume that you're either checking the bulletin or taking notes from the sermon, or tweeting out quotables. Those kinds of things is what we'll assume.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Other thoughts? Are there other thoughts, questions we have in the chat room?
And
There's a request. Yeah.
just one additional thought there is to provide choir members with hard copies, and so Tim will take care of the choir. Don't, as Tim always does. So he will find the best way to take care of your needs.
Justin, could you speak a bit to over the transition time and actually moving into the fall? A number of members of our congregation, including me, have talked about how much they actually have enjoyed the YouTube presentations of the Sunday morning services. It's not just a filming of the current service. They're very creative and they fit the media beautifully. And I think there have been lots of accolades. So as we move forward, how are we thinking about? We can't just double effort on our clergy and staff who already work many, many more hours than you can imagine. So what are your thoughts about how all this stuff fits together? Is that still a work in progress?
Well, it is a work in progress to some degree. I am having conversations with two senior pastors of two other churches who've been thinking about the same thing, and in some ways are a couple steps ahead of us. So one of the things that there are a couple things that I'd love to take you behind the curtain so you can see some of our thinking here. As we pivoted from at the beginning of the pandemic, streaming live activity from the sanctuary to pre-recording, part of that was to address some technical issues. Part of that was to care for our staff members because we were all there unmasked, breathing together in close proximity. And we knew that if COVID was brought into the space, likely you'd have your entire pastoral or program staff out with it, and that would be what we wanted. So we went to pre-recorded. As we went to pre-recorded services, we didn't. What we didn't want to do is simply mimic what happened in an in-person service, such that you would feel like you were right there in the sanctuary. We said we've got the great ability to see people in their homes and out in nature and other settings. We could be really creative. And so we created a worship service that was intended to be watched on a screen. And so all the movements, the transition, the way the service works is, we said, if we were planting an online church, a 100% online church, what would we do? And this is what we came up with, both for the university service and for the Kindred service. And so what it's meant is there are members of our community who've said, you know what, I might even be enjoying church more. Why? I think some of that is you see people closer up. There are different opportunities to interact with people that you usually don't have the opportunity to interact with, like in generosity moment, or for the addition of the children's moment in the service, the whiteboard making appearances, or being able to go to a congregation member's kitchen to talk about communion. All those different kinds of things are a product of our thinking. There are people who are worshiping with us in different geographies. That driving in from Virginia would be tough every Sunday. And so one of the questions is, if there's a person who is worshiping with us elsewhere, how will the streamed in-person worship service still feel the same without the ability to have people in the generosity moment like we've done now, or maybe without the children's moment? I mean, how will that feel? It might just be that the things that folks really love or have come to love are not present, or at least present differently. And so we're trying to be thoughtful about that as we make the transition. And I'd say that for people who are from geographies outside of our area. But I met someone recently who I was at my eldest son's track meet, and was about to leave, and she came up and said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I am a member of your church. I attend your church." And their family began attending during the pandemic. And so we're also thinking about, how do we continue to reach those folks and help people to have a similar experience. Additionally, there are families who have said to us, until we can have our younger children vaccinated, we're unlikely to show up in person. And so online is going to be our primary way of engaging the church. So what it means is across the summer, for each of the four in-person services that we have, we'll also have a pre-recorded service on those weeks. And that will continue even into the fall for an undetermined amount of time until we have a better sense of how to reach some of the people, particularly who are in other geographies. One of the clergy persons I'm talking to has been able to establish house churches of their local church in several cities across the country because they have been really intentional about their online presence. And even though they're in a state where their governor has accelerated the regathering process quite a bit more quickly than our state, their church is maintaining in-person services and this robust online service because of how it is reaching people in other places. So we're going to be thinking about those things across the summer and then have a final determination. I know it's tough for members of the choir to think, gosh, I mean, we're going to record, for Sunday and then do the same thing on Sunday. I mean, just that's a rhythm that I will share with you. But I know that there's some sustainability questions there too. So we're thinking about all those things. We'll be thinking about all those things across the summer.
Justin, if I may add, one thing we are doing for those families with children under 12 is we're gonna create a tent. We're gonna put a tent out in the parking lot by the playground. We're gonna roll some of our TVs out there and put a sound system out and allow them to be present, and maybe if not inside the sanctuary, but be present on campus. And then we'll actually serve that communion server. We'll actually go out there and serve them as well. And they'll be watching it on YouTube 30 to 45 seconds behind us, but they'll be present. And I think what's great about it is we're going to put that tent right up against the gate on the playground. So if the kids get antsy, they can go slide. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a really fun event.
It could become a permanent fixture.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes.
While we're at it, I think Daniel, in addition to so much being online from universities' sort of main headquarters, I think this has sort of allowed everyone to start to access Kindred probably more as well. And again, just the really large number of very positive events, comments that we've received within Church Council about you and your leadership with Kindred. And I think people probably have accelerated their involvement in Kindred as a result. So just tremendous along those lines. We hadn't prepared for you to say anything about Kindred during this transition time. Do you have a few comments you'd like to make?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Don, for your kind words. Yeah. So, the summary is that Kindred is going to be following essentially the same basic framework, the same basic guidelines. Obviously we have a different location, so there's a few differences in the details, but as far as our COVID safety, we'll be operating similarly. Similarly, we will have a handful of summer worship services. We're calling these pop-up services. They're going to be experimental in nature as we are trying to prepare for and look for a more long-term home for Kindred's worship services we certainly hope and expect that we can launch our weekly in-person services in the fall as well. So we're excited about that. Shameless plug, our Kindred's first in-person worship service is Sunday, June 27th at 10 a.m. It's going to be outdoors over at Pearsontown Elementary in Durham. So we're excited about it. I know we've developed a lot of fans of the Kindred band, so they will be live and in person. So it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Yep.
Great.
And if I could interject there on the Kindred note, so the Kindred services are staggered from our university in-person services. So you could double the amount of in-person services across the summer by attending Kindred's pop-up services as well. I know Daniel would love to see you at those.
I think we actually have a small enough group that if people have additional comments or questions, just unmute yourself. Feel free to do that, ask questions. Susan has commented or asked, Wes, can we safely have a church picnic when we return in September? What would you anticipate?
Well, outdoor events are generally quite a bit safer than indoor events. So yeah, unless things really go south or go bad, I think there's a reasonable chance. Let's just keep our fingers crossed and keep our eye on the data. And if things progress at the rate they've been going, I think there's a reasonable chance we can do that.
Wow.
Susan, that's a great question, and the staff doesn't know it yet, but a picnic possibility has been on my mind. I'll be chatting with the staff about this week. So I'm glad we're synced up there. It'd be really fun to have a kickoff with that kind of activity.
That's right. It's time to up the fellowship component of this as well. Other comments, questions for anyone? Jim.
Yeah, so this is not so much about worship. This is about other activities commencing after the kickoff. On our minds is the senior adult team and the Joy Group, but we are going to be trying to figure out how we can, the Joy Group, well, the senior adult team used to meet about every 6 weeks over lunch and then have our meeting. Our last such luncheon event was the very day we heard about we weren't going to worship the following Sunday. That was on Thursday, March 12th. We're hoping to start our senior adult teams resuming with, let's say, a potluck, maybe as early as September, a potluck meeting, but also significantly is how we can get the Joy Group started again. And our initial thinking, we've discussed this only in terms of clergy and staff, really, with Toby, but we know that UNC Wesley and U Crew are eager to be able to have meals again starting in the fall. And so we're thinking we're eager to have Joy Group meals again and a program. And we're really seeking ongoing guidance and updates from clergy and staff about whether that could be possible, let's say starting in October, a month or so after the kickoff, with a meal, let's say, in either the fellowship hall or the chapel, and a program following the meal. One of the things, of course, the Joy Group also used to do museums and theater and things with gardens, and we hope to do that again one day, but we're not thinking about that so much in this fall, is just getting back to gathering once a month over a meal and a program, and hopefully in our building. So that's just a request to keep all that in mind and provide us with ongoing information about what those possibilities are, what you think they'll be.
Thank you. I wonder, that's October's a little ways off, but Wes, do you have any thoughts about eating, particularly different age groups inside? That could even help groups now.
Yeah, my crystal ball doesn't extend well into October. But again, inside is a greater risk than outside. Mixed groups, I think we just, if our risk becomes extremely low in this area, and there's a good chance that we may start being able to vaccinate children less than 12 years old, hope maybe even around Thanksgiving. So sometime around that time of year, that may become possible. But let's just see what the data looks like and see how things are going. Again, indoor mixed groups, greater risk at present.
Just to follow up, we're not talking about mixed groups. The Joy people are all in their 70s and beyond and likely 100% vaccinated. And even the college students are likely to be 100% vaccinated that are part of the UNC Wesley. And that's what I'm really wondering about starting, with the fall season.
Well, I think if there is high confidence that everyone is vaccinated, inside eating becomes much more reasonable.
And certainly there may be age specific or other kind of factors where a given group we want to think about differently. But what I'm also hoping is that we can develop some general policies so that some groups not told, sure, that's fine for you to do that. And then another group hears, no, we recommend that you don't. And it feels sort of haphazard based on who you spoke to or clergy you interact with. So we want to try to do it in a way that everybody understands, and we've got some general policies. Of course, there'll be exceptions to those as we think through it. But as we see this unfold, that's why we said we're wanting to adopt some general principles and plans now, but knowing that this has got to stay flexible and dynamic. And I think all of us want to be able to be together and in person as much as we can, as soon as we can, as long as it feels safe. And obviously, some of that's a judgment call, but this is why I think it's great those of us are here tonight to hear this, and we'll continue to update that process. And certainly, Jim, I think it's great that you raised that, because we need to know what various groups would like to do and what would be optimal for them so that groups can do their planning as things evolve. Other thoughts, questions, either broad or specific?
If there are none, I'll offer some closing a thought, or at least a closing thought for us, and then Don can offer the most official closing thought. We've talked about regathering together, and throughout we've used the language some of replanting. I'd like to just lift that up a little bit more. So replanting. So Daniel's a church planter. Daniel is planting a community, and what do we mean by that? Well, it's new. It's new, and it's beginning to grow, and planting a community is such a lovely thing, because you have the opportunity to say, so who do we want to be? And how are we going to help shape the culture of this so that we can actually grow into what we want to grow into? Well, we've been apart for so long, not just us, so many communities around have been apart for so long that I think there's elements of that replanting that we have the possibility to think about. So as we start afresh in some ways and think through everything that we're doing, and talk about what makes the most sense as we're planning out all the traditional programs. How do we do it in ways that make the most sense? From groups saying, I've had committees say, look, we might meet quarterly in person, but my goodness, Zoom works great for committee meetings. Well, there's an element you say, okay, we wouldn't have thought of that before the pandemic, but now this is one good thing that's come from it, and folks may want to continue in that way. But there are other things that have been on a burner, maybe even on a back burner aspirationally, that we want to embrace during this time as we think about reaching different demographics, racially and ethnically, different demographics, age-wise. I mean, there's so many pieces in there that we've held hopes for. And we are seeking to use this replanting time as a way to say, well, what if we approach this differently than we've done before? What might it yield? So I hope you'll also be prayerful about the ways that our church cannot just come back together, but the ways that our church can grow, maybe even grow in new ways that would delight all of our hearts as we move forward. And so when I say that I think this is going to be one of our most exciting seasons as a church, I mean that. There are opportunities that the struggle has brought us, and I hope that we'll be faithful with those opportunities, and I know God will certainly be faithful to us. So exciting things to come.
Great. Thank you, Justin. I don't want to repeat what Justin said, but we know this is true. There's a huge amount of research that demonstrates that transition times, particularly after sort of traumatic kinds of events, people step back and reevaluate, and they say, I don't want to go back. I don't want to do that anymore. That's not how I want to spend my time or my energy. And they reaffirm what's important, and they think of new and creative ways that they want to live. So rather than, oh, let's just go back to where we were, I think there is just tremendous potential individually and corporately to think about. We were forced to do things in a different way. We found out we could do a lot of those really successfully. And so I really hope that you will give any ideas that you have to clergy, staff, church council, or various commissions or committees about things that we've learned, things that we might want to do, and things that we, just because we've done it for 20 or 30 years in the past, we may not want to keep doing it anymore. How do we really want to refocus those energies? So I think that is true. I don't think that's just trying to put a good spin on things. These transitions are wonderful and a sort of a natural time for stepping back, reassessing, and doing things in a new way. So it takes energy. I hope we have it. I think we do. COVID hasn't given people overall huge amounts of excess energy, but to now channel that in the new directions we want to go, I think that does speak quite well for us. And so thank you to all of you for being here tonight, and for Creighton and Justin and Wes for sharing your perspectives. Jim, please.
I just want to say that if my COVID facial hair looked as good as yours, Don, I'd probably still have it.
Thank you, Jim. It's still a work in progress, and the long-term decisions are still to be made, but it's probably got a future. Although I have to say, when I get put on screen next to Justin, you look real bad.
Well, we can't compare ourselves to Justin. I mean, you know, that's...
Those social comparisons will get you in trouble every time. But thank you for the compliment. Well, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. That's great to end on. So thank you. And again, Creighton's let us know that there's a place right front on our webpage where we'll continue to provide updates and answers to questions, and please stay in touch. So hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and thank you for being here. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.